Welcome to Real Scoop Live, a show for pool chemistry enthusiasts where we talk about all the coolest chemistry stuff you never knew you wanted to know. Any chemical advice or suggestions are opinion and utilized at the discretion of each individual pool operator. With that out of the way, let's start the show.
You walk along that street, talking nervously. Closer won't be long now.
Good morning. Here we are on season 3, episode 3, 3 for 3, sort of, kind of, with Stacy and the boys of Real Scoop Live. I'm not going to take a whole lot of your time. We're just going to flow right into this episode.
Nice.
I'll tell you, that was
Someone
sweet.
did her homework.
I did not wait to say that.
That's awesome.
Been sitting on that one a minute, huh?
Even give us a chance to know you're going to do that. That's awesome, Stacy. So, one thing, Brett, on that intro music, I have never heard the part where he says "talking nervously," and I'm like, well, that pretty much sums it up. That might be even better than I thought is for this.
Oh, in the lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we have been very excited about this episode because it kind of goes a little bit away from what we normally talk about, which is obviously chemicals and chemistry. I mean, you are talking to a couple or listening to a couple of nerds, whatever. But with all the other episodes that we've done, we have always talked about chemistry, except for, I believe, Stacy, one that we didn't, and that was the dad joke episode where we displayed a lot of chemistry, but we didn't talk chemistry. So this time we are going to go with the flow as far as hydraulics and filtration and pumps and filters and all that stuff, because frankly, you know, we have an 877 number that's a hotline that we monitor for people that are having chemical and chemistry issues for API dealers or for stores or anything like that. And this year we've had more calls than normal about issues that have been happening because of hydraulics or filtration. And although we can help you as much as we can with chemistry, which, you know, we like to do, sometimes even if the chemistry is perfect, the water can still look kind of funky, and then it's really time to start looking at the equipment. Okay.
Yeah. So widen the scope of what you're looking at troubleshooting, because it may not necessarily be the chemicals. It could be equipment related. It could be how well your stuff's working. It could be any number of things, which we'll actually get into as we go a little bit forward. So the main thing is, you can think of it kind of like this. No, let's not. That's a really clunky analogy. I'm going to move forward. So chemistry importance.
Keep going.
Yeah. Streamlining. See, we're cutting that time down.
Mm-hmm.
Chemistry, we've obviously, we think chemistry is very important, and it is important for the quality of the water, the health of the water, the health of the people swimming in it, and the health of the equipment and pool surfaces. If your chemistry isn't in check and isn't run properly, you can damage pool surfaces. You can damage pipes, pumps, filters, heaters, anything that the water touches. You can damage swimmers if they've got predilections to rashes or anything goofy like that, if you've got a bunch of stuff that's out of whack in your water. So chemistry is really important. That's why we led the first 40 episodes of Real Scoop Live were pretty much chemistry based. So this one we're kind of veering off a little bit, but they're all closely related. So we want to make sure that we don't take away from how important the chemistry is for the water quality. But also important, let's talk about filtration first. So Matt, what are we looking at here?
Well, we're looking at filter importance is like your pool kidneys.
Okay.
Right?
What does that mean?
The kidneys help to get impurities out of your system, just like a filter helps to get rid of impurities out of your pool system. So it's very important that your filter is working correctly, that it's sized correctly, and that you know really what's going on with it, because there are some terms, especially for maybe DIYers or people that are new to the industry, there are some terms you need to know as far as filtration goes. These are some of the ones that are the most prevalent. So the PSI is pounds per square inch, and that tells you how much pressure the filter, the inside of the filter is under based on how much water is going through there and what the resistance in that filter is, right? So when you have 20 or 30 gallons going through the filter and the filter can handle 20 or 30 gallons, well, your PSI is going to be a little bit low. But as the filter gets dirtier, then the pressure goes up because there's back pressure because the water can't get through the filter as fast. And so that's where the pressure where the pressure happens. Now, just a little side note here, when your filter is brand new or when it's cleaned, if you look at the pressure there, you pretty much have about a play of about 10 psi, depending on who you talk to. Some people say 5, some people say 8. But if you have a 10 psi on a clean filter, if you take a magic marker or a Sharpie or something and count 10 higher than that and put a line right there, that way you don't have to remember what your clean PSI is. You know that when that PSI measures that high up by the Sharpie mark, then that's the time to clean the filter. So that's just one of the easier ways to remember. So that way it's not something that's clogging up your head about, well, where was my starting pressure? And the other thing too is when you do troubleshooting, when you either go to a store or when you call a service guy or anything like that, they'll ask you, well, what's your pressure and what is it usually? And so that's one of those things that if you put that mark there, you know that it's -10 is where it is when it's clean. And if it's somewhere between there, or if it's higher than the black mark, then you might have an issue.
It's a really good troubleshooting tool to keep an eye on. And you see a lot of, especially on backyard pads where pressure gauges have failed and it looks like they failed many years ago. Replace them. They're not expensive, and it's a really good diagnostic tool for figuring out if you've got problems. For just a big fat, for instance, on this one, if you live in an area that has a bunch of pine trees or trees that shed needles or anything like that, those are notorious for getting clogged up inside the pump impeller, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But essentially, it's reducing the effectiveness of how well a pump can move water. That will show up on your filter as reduced pressure. So hang on, I'm not moving as much water as I normally do. The pressure's lower. Something's going on. That tells you I need to look at something going on in the pump because it's not performing as well as it normally does. It at least gives you an idea of something to look at rather than, ho-hum, something's wrong with the pool. On to the next thing. And Matt's point of marking your starting pressure on the filter gauge and kind of the clean here pressure. Some of these pressure gauges actually now have built onto them a little spinny dial that says start, and then they've got it calibrated to about 8 or 10 PSA higher where it says clean. So it's kind of giving you a dummy gauge of saying, hey, if you get here, it's time to clean your filter, which is nice because one less thing to think about, right?
Yeah.
Filter media is a fancy word of saying the stuff inside your filter that actually is doing the filtering. So there's most common ones out there you're going to see are sand filter media, which is legit a silicon type of sand that actually is a pretty good filter media for removing a lot of different things. There are cartridge filters, which the media is actually paper. It's a paper filter, so it actually pulls the material through the paper, and the junk that you don't want stays on the other side of the paper, and the clean water makes it through to the other side. And then there's DE filters, diatomaceous earth, where you've got kind of like a skeleton grid that has a fancy material wrapped around it, and the DE filter media actually rests on that grid and skeleton, and as stuff passes through, it gets caught in the DE. Those are the three main common ones. There's different variations. There's glass filter media for sand filters that functions just like sand, but has a few different criteria for how to use it and what kind of things it can pull out. And there's pros and cons to every one of them. There's no one set one that's better. There's different instances where each filter can be utilized most effectively. So when you hear people that stand on a hill and say, cartridge filters forever, sand filters are garbage. On the other hill, 2 doors down, there's a guy saying sand filters forever, cartridge filters never. And then off on another island somewhere is somebody saying DE is going to be the rock star forever. So it's personal preference. There's pros and cons. You can filter any body of water with any of these types of filter. It's just what works best in that application.
The big difference between the three of them is the micron size of what they can filter. And so if you consider that, if you're a germaphobe, you might want to have a DE filter, but just realize that the DE filter is much more labor intensive. I mean, you have to mess with it a lot more than you do some of the other ones. So it really comes down to convenience, time, how much you want to mess with it or don't want to mess with it, that kind of thing. But a micron, if you have forgotten, is a millionth of a meter. And so typically the sand filters can filter down, starting filtration down to about 30 microns or so, 25 to 30, and then cartridge is 15 to 20, and then DE is 2 to 4. So A DE filter can actually filter out stuff that you can't see with your eye, which is pretty awesome. That's why I said if you are germophobic, or if you want to make sure the water is as clean as possible, well, then getting a DE filter is really the one that you probably want to get. But in order to use that, you have to continuously buy the DE whenever you backwash it. You backwash it more because it takes more stuff out, all that kind of stuff that goes along with it. So it's exactly what Brett is saying, is that if there's different filters for different people and for different needs. And so that's the kind of thing that you can talk to your service professional about, or your installation guy, or wherever you buy your filters, about which one is actually best for you in your pool. Now, the difference between these three filters when it comes to backwashing and cleaning a filter, backwash means essentially that you're reversing flow inside of the filter. And so instead of the dirty water going through the filter media and back out to the pool, it comes in from the pool and goes back out the other way and pulls all the dirt and all the other contaminants that are in there and pushes them out of valve. And the valve is typically a backwash valve, and you'll know what we're talking about because it's a selector valve that has a little thing on the top that goes from one thing to another. And if you don't have that, you can have a push-pull valve on some of the bigger filters and older filters. There's a push-pull valve. And then the cartridge filters, they don't have a backwash mechanism at all. What you actually do with those is you turn the pump off, you release the pressure with a little pressure valve at the top, and you pull the top off, you pull the cartridge out, and you spray it off. And that is your backwash.
Cleaning it. Yep.
Yeah. So you're physically cleaning it, and like Brett said, some people call it back flush, which I haven't heard for a long time, but there's backwash, back flush, clean your filter, or whatever, and those are really interchangeable. So if someone gives you advice that says backwash your filter, but you have a cartridge filter, what that means is to clean your cartridge, right?
Yep.
And vice versa. So
another one that's getting question marks online, or when we're talking to people on the phone, vac to waste. On the types of multi-port valves like Matt was describing a minute ago, they make it really simple to change the direction of flow in your filter. So filters one setting, backwash is another setting. Vac to waste is actually an entirely different setting where it bypasses the filter entirely. So if you're vacuuming the pool to waste, you're actually not putting any of the dirt or junk that's being vacuumed into the filter. It's bypassing, just being discharged and got rid of. So the reason you'd want to do that is if you had contaminants on the bottom, say, let's just throw out like whitewater mold or mustard algae. You don't want that getting into your filter media. So if you vac to waste, you're bypassing the filter. It's never getting inside the filter. You're just getting rid of it. Real common to have those types of multi-port valves on sand filters, DE filters, cartridge filters, unless you've got a special setup put on there by either the builder or a service company where you've got a valve you have to throw and usually a line that you have to run separately. Vac to waste is a lot of times not an option. So if you've got a cartridge and you don't know, run the lines. And if you notice you don't have a port or something that can discharge water like that, you might have to get creative if you have to vacuum to waste. Just a couple common filter facts. They physically are removing contaminants. They're not breaking them down like chemicals do. They're just grabbing them so that you can get them out of the water. Some filter medias filter finer than others. So that's like what Matt was talking about with the different microns. Don't clean them too much. Now, Matt, why wouldn't we want to, we want our filters clean, and why wouldn't we want our filter clean?
I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation with either store personnel or with DIYers about they mentioned, oh, I clean the filter. I clean the filter
3 times a day right now.
It's like, well, the thing about filters is the dirtier they get, the better they filter. And so if you clean it too much, then you're not utilizing the filter to its full potential. Now, what happens though is that if you think about the pressure gauge, what we were talking about earlier, if you have the starting line, when you get 4, 5, 6 psi higher than that, your filter is actually the most efficient. Once you get to 7, 8, 9, 10, or even higher, then what happens is that the water flow slows down so much that the filter actually isn't able to do what it's supposed to do. So you have a point right there where you start getting negative returns. And so if you're constantly at 10, if the filter's clean at 10 and it's still at 10, don't think you need to clean the filter. You really want it to be, 12, 13, 14, 15, because that's actually getting smaller microns out. And so that's why we said also at the very beginning, not the very beginning, but in the last slide, is that if you have 25 to 30 on the sand, as it gets dirtier, it can actually filter down to about 20. And it's the same with cartridge. If you start 15 to 20 at the beginning, you can actually get down to 8 to 10 microns. And so if you're constantly cleaning it, you're only getting the larger microns and not the smaller microns. So that's
and potentially wasting a lot of water.
Yeah, you're wasting a lot of water, you're wasting a lot of effort, and odds are if you're not letting the filter do its thing, you're probably spending a lot more money on chemicals or chemistry trying to figure out what the problem is, when really you're just cleaning the filter too much.
Different medias, we've kind of beat this horse that they're different, but there's kind of things to consider. So with a DE filter, you're replacing the filter media every time you backwash. So when you backwash, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The DE is leaving the filter. It's the grids and the skeleton are clean. You have to put new fresh DE in to replace it. So every single time you backwash a DE pool, you're putting new DE in. With a cartridge filter, you can get, my experience has been 2 to 3 years on a cartridge. It might be more, it might be less. But if you're at 2 years and you're hitting water clarity issues that won't go away and your chemistry is right, I bet you if you put a new cartridge in, it's going to go away pretty quick. Because there's been a number of instances that specifically in the last couple of years where, well, the filter looks really clean. How old is it? It's 5 years old. Put a new cartridge in. They put a new cartridge in, boom, everything got awesome.
In the Sun Belt, they'll say they're to replace that cartridge element about once a year, once a season. But the rule of thumb is for that is that if the little bands that are holding the corrugation together, if those little bands are broken, it's time to get a new cartridge.
There's enough wear and tear on it that it broke the bands.
Yeah.
Use that as a gauge.
Yeah. And so the other part of it too is that when we're talking about DE filters, we could really probably go 45 minutes on DE filters alone. I mean, I love them, but when you backwash a DE filter, you're not backwashing out all of the DE. You're backwashing at about 75% of the DE. So if you don't adjust the amount of DE that you put in, you can actually pack the inside of that filter with too much DE, and then the pressure stays super high and it slows down the flow of the pump and all that stuff that goes with it. The other thing is that DE is considered a carcinogen. So when you're throwing DE into the skimmer, you want to make sure not to be huffing that stuff, right? I mean, you don't want to do anything like that with anything having to do with pools. But California says that it's a carcinogen, so you don't necessarily want to be breathing that in. One more trivia before we go on.
Okay.
DE is actually great to use in your lawn if you have a pest problem or an insect problem. So just FYI. A lot of pest extermination places use DE sprinkled over lawns in order to get rid of infestations of all kinds of things.
It has such aggressive, sharp angles that as the bugs crawl over the top of it, it actually dehydrates them and cuts into their underside. So it can kill bugs kind of naturally that way.
Right. So imagine if you actually get some of that in your lungs. That's why it's a carcinogen.
It can
you
do
don't want
damage.
those sharp edges inside your lungs that you're breathing forever. Anyway, let's keep on going.
Filters can harbor problems and may need special attention. So depending on the contaminant or gross stuff that you have going on in your pool, if it gets into the filter, you might need to chemically clean your filter or take your filter apart and clean the guts out just to prevent it from being a cause of reinfection of algae, whitewater mold, pink slime, any number of gross things that you don't want in the water could be a potential problem. Now, Matt was talking about when you backwash a DE filter, not all of it leaves. A lot of that's caused by oils, lotions, sunscreens, body oils, junk like that. It actually combines with the DE and turns into kind of a gross paste. Those same oils build up inside cartridge filters and sand filters as well. So if you're not using an enzyme like Ezyme Pro to actually break down the oils, you could shorten your run times. Meaning, and you don't want a short runtime, you want a longer runtime, so you don't have to backwash or clean your filters as much. So if you aren't using an enzyme, you should, because it's going to get you a better performance out of your filter. It's going to run longer. It's going to be easier to clean, easier to maintain, and the pool's going to look a lot better too. So there's filters, and that's a really fast and quick and dirty, filters, quick and dirty section over filtration. Now we're going to go into pumps. which is the heart of your pool.
You say that it's quick and dirty, but yet we're at the 20-minute mark already. So the pump is really it is the heart of your system. The pump, as we have pictured here, is very important to know that the pump is the pump and the filter is the filter. So if you're talking to someone, you got to make sure that you're both using the same nomenclature. A lot of people consider the pump as the filter because of the strainer basket that is in the strainer pot, which is right there with the clear lid on it.
That's the last line of defense to protect the guts of the pump.
Right, and that's because inside of this thing, first of all, there's the volute, which is the big black piece that's next to the green piece in the picture. The volute houses the impeller. The impeller is what makes everything work. And so the impeller is actually sucking in water and then spinning it into the return, which is at the top, which that water then goes into the filter, gets filtered by there. And the pressure and the flow of the pump is so strong that it can actually push that water through the filter media, out of the filter, and then through all the other equipment that you may have, whether it's a heater or anything else, and then all the way back to the pool. So think about that you have a pump that can literally pump 50, 60, 70 gallons per minute through all that stuff. So not only is it sucking it from the pool, it's taking it into the pump, then it's putting it into the filter, and it's putting it back to the pool. And so that's a pretty strong thing. And that's why it's so important that all those things are working correctly, because with the amount of pressure that a pump can generate, it can really cause issues if you don't look out for things. And that's one of the things that we didn't talk about on filtration, Brett, is the safety angle. When you have a filter that has the pressure per square inch on the inside of that is 15, 18, 20 PSI, if you don't release that pressure before you try to open that thing, it can pop.
Yep.
Right. And we're not talking about a boom. We're talking about boom. Right.
Yeah.
So you really
sounds like a shotgun going off.
Yeah. So you really need to make sure that that you release the pressure before you do any work on it. Make sure the pump is off. Make sure the pressure is released, and then all that. And then you don't want to stand over the thing to undo anything. Right. So just be careful out there. We don't want anyone to get hurt. So anyway,
these two first pump facts here have to do with right sizing your equipment. So you can flow water too fast through a filter, and if you flow it too fast, your filter's not performing effectively. We're going to leave it at that one because we could really go into the weeds if we talk too much about that one. A bigger pump does not necessarily mean you'll have better water flow. Mm-hmm. Think about that. A lot of times people say, well, I had a 1-horse pump, but I want to move more water, so they buy a 4-horse pump. Doesn't work like that. You can only move so much water through PVC or whatever type of piping your system has. The volume of the pipe, or how much water can flow through, is determined by how big the pipe is, not by how big the pump is. So if you've got 1.5-inch plumbing and you put a 4-horse pump on, you've probably got 3 horsepowers of extra waste cost. That pump's working harder. It's making the pressure higher. You're not moving any more water. You're not doing anything. So right sizing your equipment is really important. Clogs in the pump can cause heart attacks and prematurely break components of the pump. So if the pump is the heart of your pool, if you've got those pine needles like we talked about earlier wedged in your impeller, that's making it work harder. It's not performing well. It can cause premature strain on it. It can burn out motors. You can have it run so hot that any number of problems happen.
That's true.
And pumps can be expensive. So you want to make sure you do everything you can to keep it up and running well. How long should I run my pump? This is kind of a divisive topic right now because everybody's got different opinions, but as much as you can. There are different ways to save money. You bought a pool. If you want to keep the pool up and running well, you should be running the pump because you constantly need to filter all of the contaminants that are being introduced. There are different ways you can potentially reduce what's getting into the pool, cover your pool, a bunch of different ways. You could adjust your pump, get a variable speed pump, adjust it down so it's not flowing as hard. You use less electricity, like Matt and I were talking about before the show. Adjust it so that during the peak hours of electricity usage, where it costs the most, you're running it at a lower speed so that you aren't hitting your pocketbook as hard. And then ramp it up high at nighttime when nobody's using electricity, and you can get more benefit out of it. Run your pump.
It would cost you less to do that than to run at full speed during the peak hours. In peak hours of 2 in the afternoon to 7, especially nowadays when a lot of people are under like an extreme heat wave and stuff like that, and all the ACs are pumping out, and then the government saying that everyone needs an electric car and that what that does to the grid. I mean, it's like, look, just run it at the high speed when it costs the least, when there's a lot less people using electricity, and it would actually save you money as opposed to running at full speed during peak hours.
And if you are troubleshooting a pool that's not clear and having clarity issues, run your pump and filter 24 hours a day until you get the clarity back. It's not ever going to clear up if you don't filter, because it needs the filter to help pull the junk out that's causing the clarity issues. This one, dead spots, we're kind of bleeding into a little bit of how the pool is actually designed, how the water's flowing, how it's moving through the system and coming back in there. Turnover, that's a term that essentially says if you've got a 30,000 gallon pool, how much time does it take to move 30,000 gallons of water? So if you've got a 6 hour turnover, your system moves 30,000 gallons worth of water every 6 hours. Now, because you're moving 30,000 gallons, don't confuse that with moving every gallon of water through the system, because if you've got dead spots in the pool, water can just hang out there, and you're actually filtering the same gallons over and over again if you've got dead spots. So mixing the water up and actually moving it around is important, because if you've got dead spots in the water where it isn't freely flowing, water isn't moving, you're not chemically treating the stuff that happens there. You could have algae, you could have stuff build up. That's why it's important to essentially know where your eyeballs are pointed, what they're shooting at, and if you've got any dead spots. There's actually dye tests you can do if you want to be a complete dork and see what are the dead spots, but that's for another day.
So the big thing is swim.
Yeah, swim.
Right? If you're swimming, then you're turning up the water, and all of a sudden the dead spots really don't mean anything. But for all of us that have dealt with people that don't swim in their pools for whatever reason, whether they're on vacation or maybe the kids moved out and they're waiting for the grandkids to come visit or anything like that, you're essentially filtering the same 70 to 75% of the pool all the time.
Pools need to be used.
Yeah. So if you're in a house without any kids or without any swimmers, and you need to get the water churning, have the neighbors' kids come over and do a couple cannonballs in there, or do it yourself.
Buy a robotic pool cleaner.
Or buy a robotic pool cleaner.
Those move a lot of water too.
Those things can pump out 50 to 60 gallons per minute out of the top, which then really helps everything, especially if you have a heated pool.
Mm-hmm.
So
certain equipment requires flow to operate properly. So if you've got a salt cell, a heater, a UV system, ozone, or chemical controller, a lot of those systems have flow sensors on them. So if you don't have enough flow, they're not turning on. So if you don't have chlorine in your water, but you have it set so that you're only running 3 hours a day, your salt cell is only going to make chlorine for those 3 hours.
Yep.
Keep that in mind. And they have a threshold. If you don't have enough flow going through them, they're still not going to turn on. So if you've adjusted your pump to run real low and your heater's never kicking on, you might need to ramp it up so that the heater actually has enough water moving through it. So all these different things are playing together. And if you put one thing out of whack, it can throw off 20 different systems that you then have to spend a boatload of time to correct afterwards.
Yeah.
Some chemicals need flow. Matt, what do you think about chlorinators?
Yeah. Well, chlorinators are erosion feeders, and so you need water to erode the chlorine for you. And if you don't have enough water, or if you have too much water, then you can actually over-chlorinate or under-chlorinate without even realizing that you're over-chlorinating or under-chlorinating just because of the flow of the equipment.
So the water needs to be moving.
The water needs to be moving, or needs to be moving. And what Brett was saying about, if your water's too slow, going too slow through some things, they might not work at all. But if they're going too fast, then they might not be in the chambers or in the equipment long enough to get what they need out of them. So that's why flow is so important. So with chlorinators, with saltwater chlorine generators, with mineral systems, any of those things, you need to have the proper flow, because too low is bad and too high is bad. So
got to find that butter zone.
Yes. Yeah.
Just kind of tying this up a little bit at the end, a good rule of thumb, and this isn't 100% of the time, but it's the first level of troubleshooting.
Mm-hmm.
If the color of your pool water is off, you probably have a chemistry problem.
Yeah.
Okay. If the clarity of the water is off, it's probably a filtration problem.
And boy, we could really go down the rabbit hole with this one.
Yeah,
right?
this is a whole other topic for a
And
different
I'm sure
episode.
that we have done this kind of thing before on some of the other RSL episodes. So if you want to talk about clarity or different colors of the pool, look up in our catalog, because we've covered purple pools, green pools, black pools, all that kind of stuff. Rotten egg smell pools. Those have been in different episodes. Now,
the
without going down the big rabbit hole, if you had an algae outbreak and you just killed the algae and your water clarity is off, it's because of the dead algae. But all things considered, if everything's kind of been normal and all of a sudden your water looks a little hazy or not quite right and your water balance is good, well, that's a filtration problem.
If you've got a water quality issue, if it's not chemicals, it's filtration. If it's filtration, it's not chemicals. If it's neither, it's both. So
nice.
You might need to look at both of them.
Rewind that and listen to that again.
I don't want to.
Very, very sage advice.
So chemistry and filtration are symbiotic. They play off of each other. They have to be working well with each other. And if they aren't, you're going to have problems. So the main thing, keep your chemicals in check, keep your filtration and your pump and your filter systems running well and effectively, because those are the two main lines for keeping your pool quality up, keeping safety up. You got to have both or you don't have anything.
That's right.
We put this one in there in case we had extra topics, but we ran over. So we're not going to talk about extra stuff, but we might kick the peanut around next time.
It's funny because we actually kicked the peanut around during the episode.
We could call this, instead of Real Scoop, we just could have called it Kicking the Peanut.
Yeah.
With Stacy and the boys.
Yeah, that's right.
But
okay, well, we're going to call this the episode 3, going with the flow, hydraulics and filtration. We had a great time talking about this stuff as usual. If you like this, please hit the like button, and if you want to share this, we'd really appreciate it. You can subscribe to the API Water channel and leave some comments if there's other things you want us to either to clarify in an upcoming episode or to cover an upcoming episode. We will take your tips anytime. So just leave the comments below, like and subscribe, and we're going to call that a wrap.
Bye.
Now I can't wait for summertime, it won't be long when we come back and love you like I do.